Hello, this is Father Hightower, and welcome to Vox SFX, the voice of St. Francis Xavier Parish in Missoula, Montana. We are so pleased that you have joined us. Your participation enriches our entire community. We hope that our show serves as a point of light, helping to deepen our understanding and experience of the Catholic faith in history. So join us as we seek through prayer, study, interviews, and discussion the roots of the practice of our faith. God bless.
Hello, and welcome to Vox SFX, the voice of St. Francis Xavier Parish in Missoula, Montana. We're so very pleased you could be with us today. In our episode today, we're going to speak to Dr. Katherine Greiner in the first of a four-part series where we are talking to the various faculty and attendees of Carroll College. Now, this wonderful institution here in Montana is located in Helena, our state's capital. It is a Catholic university, but it is also one that is open to people of all faiths, of all traditions, who want to study in the way that we are promoting. Dr. Greiner is an associate professor there, and she is a great representation of the kind of mind, of the quality of teaching that takes place at this institution. In the episode today, we're going to be covering some of the material that she was speaking about in the Novena of Grace. Those of you who are longtime listeners of the show will remember our talk about what a Novena of Grace is from last year. Well, Dr. Greiner was our presenter at this particular Novena of Grace, and this particular topic is on poverty of spirit. Now, we covered this a little bit last year when we talked with Father Cochrane about the Beatitudes, but Dr. Greiner takes it in a very, very deep direction as we do a deep dive into it. A novena, after all, is 9 days straight of prayer, 9 days straight of presentation. And so her deep understanding of this particular subject was a treat for those of us here at St. Francis Xavier to experience. She draws heavily from the work of Johann Metz and his understanding of this as well. So I'm extremely excited to share this with you. I know this episode was a little late coming out, and that is because I was in attendance at the Eucharistic Congress, which is where the next 3 episodes are going to be coming from. Kind of a live, on-the-ground sort of idea with the Eucharistic Congress, and I'm very excited to present that to y'all. I know it can be kind of confusing sometimes that we record this and then later we record the intro, and so there's some past or present or future tense that sometimes gets mixed up. But as the time of recording this intro, we have just finished with the Eucharistic Congress, and I'm just starting the editing process for our first episode, which is going to be there's going to be some candid commentary as we're going through, interviews with some of the presenters, testimonials from some of the attendees, and so much more. So I cannot wait to present these next 4 episodes to you of the fantastic people who are produced by Carroll College. So, without further ado, let's get into it and talk about the poverty of spirit with Dr. Katherine Greiner. We have a real treat for you, because in the studio today we have Dr. Katherine Greiner. Katherine, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Nicholas. It's so good to be here.
Well, we are lucky enough here at St. Francis Xavier to have you doing a series here for the Novena of Grace. Those of you who have been listening to the show for a while will recall last year we talked a little bit about what the Novena of Grace is and how it's kind of done. And so this year we have Katherine as our speaker, and what a treat. What a treat to have you here.
Thank you.
Well, would you mind telling the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am an Associate Professor of Theology at Carroll College in Helena. And the reason I get to be here all 9 glorious days is I'm on sabbatical right now, which is a real treat. And so this has been something I've been looking forward to a lot, to be able to do this Novena of Grace. Most of my classes, I focus on spirituality, and I've taught a course on ministry in the church. I teach a class called Medieval Women Mystics, so I get to catch a lot of the great spiritual writings in our church, and that's a lot of fun. I'm originally from Oregon, and I actually went to Carroll for my undergrad. I majored in history and theology. And then I went on to graduate work at Weston Jesuit School of Theology, which is now part of Boston College. It's called Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. They're in Boston, and I had great 10 years there. And then I did my doctoral work also at Boston College. And then Carroll called me. They needed an instructor for a year. And I said, yes, please, because I was still finishing my dissertation. And 1 year turned into 10. And here I am now. And I'm very, very blessed to be back at my alma mater, be back in Montana. And it has been a real joy to be here in Missoula.
Well, and I'm sure that Father Hightower has talked to you a little bit about Boston College, because he's a huge fan of
Yes.
Boston College.
Yes. We talked about how he was at Weston just a few years before I got there.
Oh,
so
no joke.
we have crossover friends or acquaintances from the Weston days. We both still claim Weston, even though it is now Boston College.
Same colors, right?
I don't even know if Weston had colors, to be honest. Weston was just the small school that was designed mainly for the Jesuit theologate over on the East Coast, and they had a lot of lay students there as well. And it was a wise and prudent decision to move together with a program at Boston College. Good foresight on the president's part. So I don't know what our colors were at Weston, but they're certainly maroon and gold now.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Carroll before we get into our meat and potatoes for this episode.
Sure.
Because you've been there for about a decade, as you say.
Yep.
What a wonderful institution.
It is. We are so blessed to have a place like Carroll College in Montana, to have a Catholic college, to have a diocesan Catholic college, one of the few in the country. Right here in Montana is a real gift. And being a product of Carroll myself, having been a student there, it is a real privilege to return and to be able to educate wonderful young people and people from all walks of life. And what I truly love about teaching theology at Carroll, all of our students are required to take 2 courses in theology. Our introduction course, Theological Foundations, and then another theological elective. And what's beautiful about that is that we have students from all walks of life, from different faith backgrounds, some with no faith backgrounds, who come together to think theologically, to think about what does it mean to have faith in God? How has that impacted our world? How does that shape our world? How does that shape who we are as human beings? And to share with one another different insights and different perspectives. But also at the heart of that, to share the Catholic tradition with students is a real gift, and one that I can't say enough about how much I enjoy it and how much I learn from the students. They truly help me see faith, particularly from their perspective today, some of the challenges they see in the world, some of the challenges they see in the church, some of the graces they see in the church and the world. It's such a gift to walk with them.
I know several people who have gone to Carroll. They all had a wonderful time there. Our organist actually is also a graduate of Carroll College, and she lamented to me when we were talking about it that she was never able to take one of your classes. And when she was listening to you speak, she was like, dang it, I really should have focused in on that.
Well, was she there when I was there?
I don't know. We'd have to talk to her.
Well, maybe I'll put some courses online and we can get a wider group of people, auditors from around the state. That might be fun.
You'll get me. That's for absolute, for sure.
Yeah, it's a real joy to teach there.
Well, you're also teaching us a little bit as well throughout the course of this novena, and we're talking about the poverty of spirit. Last year, Father Cochran and I did a series on the Beatitudes, where he talked a little bit about the poverty of spirit, but you've really taken it in a deeper direction. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, sure. Well, I have to tell you, when Luke invited me to do the novena, and then I shared with him, better yet, I'm going to be on sabbatical, so if you just want me to take the whole thing on, and he immediately said yes.
Of course, yeah.
And he said, well, what theme would you like to do? And I was kind of flabbergasted for a minute. I wasn't sure. I mean, 9 days, That's a long time. So you want to be careful to choose something that you don't end up repeating yourself too much, but at the same time can be broken into pieces that people can actually take something from it. I think sometimes in theology, maybe in philosophy too, especially as college professors, we can get a little distracted by kind of the over-intellectualized work we do, which is really, really important. But one of my goals is to make sure that how we share our theology is something that is pastorally sensitive, right? That can reach people at crucial moments in their lives, and that they can learn and listen to the Word of God, both deepen their understanding of God and their understanding of their faith life, and to somehow then bring it into their everyday life, their everyday living. So one of my favorite texts that I read in graduate school was not one of the giant theological tomes, but it was this very short book by the German theologian Johann Baptist Metz called Poverty of Spirit. And it's one that I fell in love with that helped me not only intellectually, but also spiritually. And I've continued to teach that text to my undergrads. I thought this might be a great opportunity for me to really sit with that text, having read it several times, having taught it several times, but to really sit down and organize it in such a way that it could be presented in a pastoral setting. And what I love about this book, Poverty of Spirit, is that Metz challenges us to think about what it means to truly be human. And that oftentimes when we ask the question, what does it mean to be human? We go directly to, it means to be sinful, and it means to be always make mistakes, and we seem to degrade ourselves that way. And what Metz does is says, we need to reclaim our humanity as the way we are created, and it's actually when we reject that humanity that we fall into sin. And he uses the story of the temptations of Christ to show how that is what Jesus does. Jesus is this poverty of spirit, the one human being who lives exactly as we are all called to live. And so in Jesus's full humanity, we come to see who we are called to be. When we reframe poverty of spirit that way, I think it opens a door to see it as an expression of our deepest humanity.
Well, an invitation, too. It's an invitation to depend on God and to look to our example of the man who was fully human but also fully divine to instruct us in kind of how to do that. Because, again, it's not necessarily saying, we're poor in spirit, woe is us, but it's saying, we're poor in spirit, lead us.
Yes.
Fill us with the Spirit.
Very well said. I love that. Yes. We are in need of God's grace, and we're created that way so that we may choose to be in this loving relationship. And that truly is what is at the heart of poverty of spirit. And as I said at the end of our first session, one of my deepest prayers for this novena is that by getting in touch with our poverty of spirit, we come to share more fully in the fullness of Christ's humanity so we can share in his full divinity. That's the Christian story right there in a nutshell.
So when we're talking about poverty of spirit and the invitation that is presented to us, what are the directions that you're kind of taking that? We're going to be publishing this episode after the novena is over, so if you're listening to it, you can go back on the St. Francis Xavier website and YouTube to give it a listen. But we're not going to do any spoilers here, but you're going to do some spoilers for me.
Right. Yeah, poor Nicholas. He'll get the spoilers.
Oh, no.
As I said, so Metz's book is set up in such a way that it really lends itself to the structure of the novena. I don't think he intended that, but I'm finding it very helpful. But he first starts by looking at the life of Christ. And he starts by talking about especially that Philippians hymn, right? The Christ hymn from Philippians, that he did not regard equality with God something to be grasped, but rather emptied himself. That's this understanding of the incarnation, that Jesus lets go of his transcendent capacity in order to be fully human, right? He empties himself. And Metz goes a step further by connecting that to the Gospels. He looks at the story of the temptations and says it's in the story of the temptations that we see the concrete ways that Jesus doesn't cling to his divinity, but rather empties himself. And Metz has this great insight, and I shared this in the first talk, that this is Satan didn't see this one coming. Is what Metz says. Satan's greatest fear is that humanity will actually claim their full humanity. So the scene in the desert is Satan trying to seduce Christ and say, hey, you don't really want to give up that divinity you've got. And Christ's emphatic no to Satan is the emphatic yes to our full humanity. When I first read that was like, first of all, a dumb moment, right? Like, how have I not seen that before? But also this just beautiful moment of really understanding the incarnation in a new way. And Metz goes on to then show us all the ways that we are seduced by the temptation to resist our humanity, by resisting our poverty of spirit, by resisting the ways in which we are needy, the ways we are ordinary, right? The ways in which we try to reject all the things that make us feel those not so great feelings of shame and humiliation. And Metz points out that we've actually twisted poverty of spirit. We think, oh, I'm so needy because I'm sinful, where it's rejecting our neediness that makes us sinful, rejecting our poverty of spirit. The best part about Metz's text, I think, if he had stopped there, it still would be a very, very rich insight. But he goes on and tells us the concrete ways we are poor in spirit. And what I like about concreteness or particulars is that it actually can mean something for our everyday lives. Sometimes spiritual or theological texts can become so heady that we don't know how they can be lived. And there's value in those as well. But what I love about Metz is that he's always about being on the ground. Like, how do we ground this in our daily life? So he points out 6 ways that we experience poverty of spirit, and he links them directly to the life of Jesus. Now, what's great about having 6 ways is that it also lends itself to talking about during a novena, right? I do have to put a couple of them together just to make sure we have time to get to the end. But today, for example, we began by looking at the poverty of our neediness. And tomorrow we'll look at, so no one will hear this except you, Nicholas, sorry. We're going to look at what Metz calls the poverty of the commonplace, how the ordinariness of our lives can sometimes feel boring, and we try and distract ourselves from that, or we feel that our worthiness only comes from being seen and noticed. I mean, we can see that today in kids wanting to be YouTube influencers at young ages. And how can we cultivate a love and a reverence for the ordinary in our lives? And the second one we'll look at tomorrow is kind of feels like it's the opposite of that, but it's the poverty of what Metz calls our unique calling. That sometimes we reject that which is most powerful in us because it scares us. We want to blend in with the crowd, but we are called to be uniquely ourselves in the world because we are a unique gift to the world that God offers. The fourth concrete way that poverty of spirit shapes our lives that we try to reject is what Metz calls the poverty of our provisionality and incompleteness. Don't worry, I'll unpack that more. You can see that on the YouTube video. But this is the understanding that we change and we don't know the future. And we can't change the past. We are people, we are historical beings at the mercy of time and place. We're embodied And that can sometimes frighten us, right? Because we don't have control over what happens next all the time. At the same time, how do we use our power? How do we use our capacity for change in the world? So finding that balance helps us live that out. The fifth concrete form of poverty of spirit is our finitude, that we can't do it all. And that's a real challenge today. I think we live in a world that tells us that we only have value if we're producing, making, going. And remembering that we are finite, remembering that we can't do it all or be it all is actually a great liberation, but it's scary too. And then finally, the poverty of spirit that none of us can escape, none of us, no matter what we do, is the fact that we die, that we are mortal. We see this, of course, in the life of Jesus. The death on the cross, Jesus' passion and death, is the full completion of his emptying into the human experience. And when we share in that, that is where new life is found. So that's the direction of the talk. The final point that Metz makes, and I must mention this, is that by embracing our poverty of spirit, we come to realize that we are fully at the mercy and in the love of God. So Metz says, poverty of spirit leads us directly to worship, to prayer, because it is only in our poverty of spirit that we come before God and say, I need you, right? I love you. So for Metz, it all culminates in human worship, that is where we find our true humanity, is in our relationship with God. And we experience that in and through all forms of worship. I don't want to give too much away to you about that, but for those listening, go and listen to it. That'll be day 8.
Well, and you had talked a little bit ago about Philippians, and when Paul was saying that, Christ had emptied himself out and didn't regard himself equal, but immediately after that, he talks about why Christ is exalted and why he is kind of placed above us because of that. And I think that that's really significant, because God didn't place an angel above us, because an angel wouldn't understand the human experience, wouldn't be able to really connect and be the bridge between us and the divine. So instead, humbling and submitting to the human experience, we then have a God who not only understands in terms of omnipotence, but also in terms of that finite experience. And so when we share in that, like you say, we're able to embrace what is given freely and with joy. But what happens when we don't? What happens when we deny this poverty of spirit and we go our own way? What are the pitfalls that exist for us there?
Well, yesterday I gave an image for this. I'm learning how to ski, and sometimes my poor husband teaching me just kind of shakes his head in disbelief as I don't follow his instructions, and I look pretty silly on the side of the mountain. Fortunately, I haven't hurt anything yet, but it's possible. Yeah, I think when we don't embrace this poverty of spirit, that is when we separate ourselves more and more from others and from God. And of course, we call this sin. But I want to be careful here. I think this is something that we all fall into. We're all sort of entangled in this messiness of rejecting our poverty of spirit because it's really scary, right? It's frightening to face what we perceive to be this nothingness or this smallness or this poverty, right? This neediness we have, because what happens to, quote, the self, right? When we lose our sense of identity, even just that gospel reading from yesterday, and for those of you listening, it would be the Thursday after Ash Wednesday, where Jesus says, those who follow me must deny themselves, right? Like, we spend so much of our life just trying to figure ourselves out. To then deny it is really frightening. But I think what happens when we don't take seriously our poverty of spirit, when we aren't in tune to our neediness or our ordinariness or our unique call or the fact that we're finite, or the fact that we'll die, is we twist our existence and we make idols out of the wrong things, right? So today I talked about how we're capable of turning our desire for self-sufficiency. It can easily become an idol. And we resist sharing our needs with others, but that means we also resist responding to the needs of others. And it's really hard to build community when we aren't in touch with how much we need one another. Right? And that's just one example. What poverty of spirit does is it liberates us to, and I'm using a Henry Nouwen image, we go from closed fists to open hands when we live with poverty of spirit. We probably all can identify times where we've so twisted ourselves into thinking we've got to do it on our own, that we don't need the help of others, that we feel really almost like we feel like we're choking, right? We're kind of strangled by our incessant need to continue to consume things, to distract ourselves from feeling bored, to distract and entertain ourselves out of feeling sort of the not always good feelings of feeling empty or embracing silence. But that's precisely where we find God. That's what I think we miss out on when we don't embrace our poverty of spirit. We miss out on the joy of communion. And that is why I'm convinced Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God." It's because what else can we be if we are poor? We are in the reign of God then, when we really, really embrace that.
Well, and you had mentioned today in your talk this concept of rugged individualism. And for those of you listening around the world, this concept is very American. I mean, not exclusively American, but that, like you said, that self-sufficiency, that self-made man sort of idea, that may even hinder us in embracing this poverty of spirit, because it's kind of antithetical to what we're brought up with the so-called Protestant work ethic.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a lie, right? Like, it's a myth. Rugged individualism never really existed. But if we share in that lie or share in that myth, it's a lot easier to be convinced to buy a lot of stuff we might not need. We can be convinced that it's us against the world. I think that's by design, by those who are profiting from the myth of rugged individualism. And I think we're particularly susceptible to that myth in the western half of the United States, right? Because it permeates some of the cultural images that are so problematic. Here we sit in Montana, right? And we know, we all kind of chuckle or cry at the way the West is being portrayed in popular culture as very much kind of these self-made men, right? And yet, if we really look into the history of the West and some of the not so great parts of it and some of the beautiful parts of that, we see everything's about community and dependence on others and dependence on the land. I think it's really important to note that poverty of spirit helps us connect to that interdependency we have with each other, but also the earth. We risk that connectedness when we don't take that seriously, and when we buy into the myth of rugged individualism or self-sufficiency.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the West and kind of the way that this myth has taken place, because it's easy for us to idolize figures like Wyatt Earp or Doc Holliday, who do these mythological feats of individualism, but the communities, the cities, were not necessarily built by these singular heroes. When we embrace this poverty of spirit and we're able to kind of die unto ourselves to live unto Christ. What are the benefits that come with that? What are we looking for in terms of the enrichment for our own lives?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm chuckling because I'm like, yeah, what's the return on investment here with this poverty of spirit? We'll just keep all economic terms going. I think one way to say it is, how else can we be fully human but by embracing what makes us human, which is being creatures in loving relationship with God and with one another. And I think the benefits of poverty of spirit, of cultivating or maybe practicing some of the spiritual practices I'm offering throughout the novena, is that it actually prepares us for what is inevitable, which is us facing our poverty at some point. Those of us who have journeyed with loved ones who have died, who have been sick, who have suffered, we know all too well the reality of human suffering, of human poverty. And we know that millions of our brothers and sisters throughout the world suffer on a daily basis. Being in touch with our poverty of spirit puts us more in touch with those around us, with our loved ones, and it prepares us for the reality of our own death, of our own mortality, so that we may share in that new life. It prepares us to say yes to God in the same way that Jesus said yes to humanity, right? We then are empowered and given the grace to say yes to God. Metz's response to that would be, because how else will we be us without poverty of spirit?
How soon after reading Metz were you actually able to put this into practice? Because it kind of flies in the face of what we're taught, what we're raised with. Was this difficult to apply to your own life? Are you still struggling to apply it to your own life?
He's watching me laugh as we say. Oh yes, it's always a work in progress. Yeah, I'd love to tell you that right after I read Metz, the light bulb went off and there I was, just poor in spirit. But as we all know, that's not how it works. Honestly, I think for me, what Metz said really struck me when I first read it. And it stayed with me. And then I began to teach it. And that's when I really started to unpack what is at the depth of what Metz says. But in my own life, I will say it was my sister got sick in 2018 and had a very brief, and yet seemingly long at the time, illness, and then was in hospice and then passed away in 2019. And it was during that time where I was witnessing her level of need. And I was sort of at the mercy of my own need in my grief. And I became more and more aware of what truly matters. And I think poverty of spirit helps us home into the truth of what really, really matters. And that is the love of others and this love of God. And it sounds so simple, right? We say it a lot, but it's so simple because it's also hard, right?
Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy.
No, that is well said. You ask about me practicing it in my life. I mean, probably those closest to me, if they listen to this, will be like, well, she could really work on that concrete shape of poverty. And, it's funny, as I was putting all of this together, I chuckled because there were a few points where I said something like, we all can identify with this. And then I went, I actually don't know if we all can. This is coming from my own lived experience. So, for example, the poverty of finitude. I'm someone who likes efficiency and I like productivity. And even in writing these, I can tell that I'm writing something to myself as well, right? That something I need to hear just as much as anybody, maybe more so than others. So I don't know if that answers your question. I am still a work in progress.
Well, and I think that is a part of the poverty of spirit, is to recognize that we aren't complete in of ourselves, that we are a constant work in progress. And as Aristotle said, excellence is not a destination, but it's a practice.
It is. Yep. Yep. I think of that Mother Teresa quote, I should say Saint Mother Teresa quote, "We are not called to be successful, we are called to be faithful." And I think poverty of spirit gets us more in touch with that call to faithfulness rather than the call to success. Because, man, we can turn the faith project into a success project, right? And I think poverty of spirit reminds us that this is a journey. This is a pilgrimage, as we might say this year during the Jubilee year of Pilgrims of Hope. It's a pilgrimage, and one that we do out of faithfulness, not simply out of a desire to get it right or perfect.
Well, and as you said before, it can be easy to over-theologicize. Is that a word?
It is now.
But we have a very scholastic faith. You know, we have some of the great doctors of the church, like St. Thomas Aquinas, were very wordy and very technical in their writing. And even he was accused of being overly logical in his approach to God. But translating that into something that is practical, something that is pastoral, is very important, because not everybody engages on that higher level. There needs to be something more personal, more relatable, in order for it to really resonate.
Yes, yes. And just to give a little break to St. Thomas Aquinas, I think you're absolutely right. No one can argue about the depth of his love and passion and commitment to the pastoral reality. When I teach Thomas Aquinas, I always make sure to also have the students read the Eucharistic hymns of St. Thomas, because it is that rich liturgical life and his understanding of faith that undergirds, that supports all of the rich scholastic theology that was very in tune with the time, right? And his incredible intellect. But it was always accompanied with that faith. I do think you're right, though, that it's hard to sit down and just read the Summa, right? And to see how does this come into our lives. And it is my belief that the real ministry of theologians in our church is, yes, of course, to help us dialogue with the faithful and with the magisterium in such a way that we can really attune ourselves to how do we live this faith in a way that is life-giving and in a way that leads us in the way of Christ.
And that emptiness that we talk about, that's not something that's exclusive to the Catholic practice either. There's a lot of other faiths that talk about this idea of the emptying of self and the observation of not just reality, but the divine reality as well. And our other cousins, the people of the book, Muslims talk about submission. It's one of the huge cornerstones of their faith as well. And so we can learn a lot in terms of our own faith through that, and through that idea of the kingdom. Because as the Beatitude says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom shall be theirs. And that's the kingdom that we're all bringing. That kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. In doing so, in having this poverty of spirit, we open the way for God to be able to work through us to bring that kingdom about.
It allows us to then participate with God in the building of that kingdom. I think that's the real grace. And as you said, this is the real beautiful truth about Christianity, that God so loves us, that God enters into this experience, not only to model for us, but to journey with us, right? And to offer us the grace to continue to walk that path. So Christ is both the goal and Christ is the gateway, is the doorway to that. I think you're right. This opens us to widen our view a bit. And how do we learn from and with people of other traditions? And how do we understand a community of the human family in this poverty of spirit.
I think we've covered quite a bit here, and I've been very much enjoying it. Is there anything else you want to touch on for our time here?
No, I don't think so. As my students would say, wrap it up, Dr. Greiner.
Well, I do want to do one little piece of promotion real quick, because here at the end of the month, we've got the Eucharistic Congress that's taking place in Helena. I plan to be in attendance. We're going to be doing some interviews with some of the presenters there, and of course with some of the people who are participating to kind of capture the spirit of the moment. Do you have anything planned for the Eucharistic Congress?
I am not part of the presenters this year. I was last year. I did one of the breakout sessions. They gave me a pass this year because of the sabbatical. But I have quite a few friends who are presenting, and I think even some students. So it should be a really holy and wonderful event. And I know Carroll College is thrilled to be hosting it. I believe, yeah, it's at Carroll. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, it's kind of a twofer for those of us going, too, because one of the places that have been marked out for pilgrimage this year at the Jubilee is the cathedral there in Helena. So if we're able to attend Mass while we're attending, well, then we've done the pilgrimage as well.
Yes, that's true. The Eucharistic Congress might be part of that as well. I know they're promoting that as part of the Jubilee year. So, yeah. And speaking of that, I'm very excited because one of these days while I'm in Missoula, I'm going to head up to the St. Ignatius Mission, which is also one of the sites that has been identified for the Jubilee year. So I'm looking forward to that mini pilgrimage as well.
Well, have you had a chance to meet Father Victor yet? He's the one of the main priests up there in St. Ignatius.
I'm laughing. Father Victor and I were actually classmates at Boston College.
No joke.
Yeah. And it's so funny. We have not yet connected in our ministries here in Montana. So I'm really hoping I get to see him.
Well, he's been on the show a couple of times, and much like you, he has a beautiful mind that I would just delve into forever if I could. But unfortunately, like you were talking about, we have finite amount of time. But thank you so much for coming on the show, though, and thank you so much for doing the novena. It's really quite a blessing that you're giving us.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicholas. It's been a real honor and privilege. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to seeing you tonight as we do the novena, and just thank you again. And for those of you listening, please check out the YouTube coverage of these reflections. They will definitely deepen your Lenten journey.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you for being with us today as we walk as pilgrims this road together. If you feel called to learn more, please consider checking out St. Francis Xavier or your local Catholic church. All are welcome into our community as God loves us all equally. If you are interested in supporting the Vox SFX podcast, please visit sfxmissoula.org/donate. Until next time, go forth in peace and be the light of Christ in someone's day.
By Jove, we've got it.